on the morning of November 16th of last year, 2014, at Papa Don's Pub, the pub you just had an opportunity to see, the defendant, Kenan Ivery, returned. He returned to Papa Don's. He returned to Papa Don's after being kicked out. He returned to confront those who in his mind had disrespected him, and he returned with that loaded .40 caliber handgun. Toward 1:53 a.m., so the bar was still in business, the place was filled with patrons. One of those patrons was Justin Winebrenner, Officer Justin Winebrenner, officer with the Akron Police Department. He was not in uniform, he was not on shift, he was there as a patron that evening. But being there, he knew of the defendant's anger in returning. He knew the circumstances of his return, and he knew the agitation that came along with it. And not long after Kenan Ivery returned to that bar that night, Officer Winebrenner became aware that he had a handgun tucked in his side waistband. So Officer Winebrenner, along with another patron by the name of David Heisel, engaged in the heroic act of getting this individual out of the bar, getting the defendant out of the bar, getting the anger out, getting the gun out, isolate the danger, and keep the people inside that bar safe. And in fact, they were successful. They did in fact get Kenan Ivery out of that bar, did get that gun out of that bar. But in the process, Kenan Ivery was able to shoot that gun 4 times. And 2 of those bullets struck the body of Justin Winebrenner. He would ultimately, out in that parking lot where you just walked, would fall to the ground, and he would die as a result of those 2 gunshots. Now, Papa Don's Bar started in 2011. The owners are Tiffany Miller and her stepfather, Don Miller. Don Miller is Papa Don. They had always wanted to own a bar, and in about 2007, their dream started coming true. They purchased that property in an auction. And it took a little bit of time to get things running, but ultimately in 2011, Papa Don's was up and running. And the goal was to make this a great bar, a fun bar, but most importantly, a safe bar. Keep the troublemakers out. And one of the first things they did is that they had security, like many bars do. Hired off-duty police officers to serve as security, to make sure there was no problems, and that notice went out to the outside that there were officers in here. And if you wanted to cause trouble, if you're looking for a good time that involves fights and so forth, this was not the place to be. One of the individuals who was hired as security was Officer Justin Winebrenner. Now, Officer Winebrenner, Justin and Tiffany, they knew each other before that. He had served as a security officer in another bar under similar situations in which Tiffany had been a bartender. So they were friends. And they became good friends as time went on. And then finally in 2013, they became more than friends. They started dating. And in the summer of 2014, on Tiffany's birthday, Justin proposed to Tiffany. And she said yes. He was ecstatic about the idea of becoming a permanent part of not only Justin's life, but of his young daughter, Charlie. So life went on. Both of them had full-time jobs, maybe even more than full-time. Tiffany running the bar, Justin, a patrol officer for Akron Police Department, but whenever he could, he would go over to the bar after his shift on his days off. And so he pretty much became a regular there to be with Tiffany, to help out, and to hang out with friends as he became close with several of the regulars within that bar. Fast forward then to the night of November 15th, it's a Saturday night. Justin had been away. He went on a hunting trip that week, and in fact, the original plan was for him to come back late Saturday night so he could go to the Browns game with a bunch of friends and Tiffany on Sunday. But he had been successful in getting a deer, and because of that, he came back home early that day. And coming back home early allowed him and Tiffany to go to a fundraiser that evening, a little bit after dinner time. It was the Elliott youth football team was putting on a fundraiser that night. The team wanted to go down south and play in a national tournament. I think it was about 5th or 6th graders were involved. Now Justin and Tiffany didn't have any kids on the team, but one, the team is coached by Akron police officers, and two, Papa Don's had donated items to try to help the team raise money that evening. So they went there. It's also important to note that the defendant's son played on that football team, and so he was there as well. And Tiffany recalls seeing him that evening. Tiffany and Justin would have seen him at the fundraiser, but there was no conversation, no interaction. They didn't know each other, but they did see each other there. Now, as the night went on, a bunch of people from that fundraiser decided to go to Papa Don's. The defendant went there a little bit before 12:30 in the morning, so now we're to Sunday the 16th. And we're going to be talking about the inside of the bar that you just saw and somewhat of the seating arrangements and the diagram. And we're going to have a diagram up on that screen, and to allow everybody to view it, I'm going to put a bigger one up here as well. Once again, you just saw the bar, but it has an L-shaped bar in it. When you walk in, there's tables to the right, tables to the left. There's also that Cleveland round blow-up thing, which was there on November 15th. And when I refer to the positioning of people in the bar, we use that L shape as well as the fact that there's a north side and a south side. And the south side of the bar is the bottom of the L. It's the area of the bar close to the restaurant, close to the office, closer to the street. The north side is the other side, which is closer to that patio door and closer to the entrance to the bar. So as I stated, Kenan Ivery got there before Justin and Tiffany that night, a little bit before 12:30. He sat down at the bar, kind of a couple spaces closer to the south end. Around this area as you start approaching the bottom of the L. Now the defendant was not a stranger to Papa Don's. He'd been there before. He'd been there at least a handful of times before. Usually went alone, usually kept to himself, didn't cause any problems, liked to go there to watch football games, especially the Chicago Bears. Justin and Tiffany showed up about 45 minutes later. When they came in, smiles, hugs, handshakes, not only by the employees that work there, but a lot of the patrons, a lot of the regulars, because all these individuals were good friends. Many of them were planning to go to the Cleveland Browns game together the very next day. And several of these people are going to play important roles in this case. So I'll give you a couple names now, and you'll hear some of these names again and again. The first is Dave Wokady. He's known as Big Dave, and when he testifies, you'll see why he's Big Dave. He's a very large man. He was at the bar that night. He just started kind of dating a lady by the name of Jennifer Imhoff, and she was there with him that evening as well. Dave Eisel, whose name I already mentioned, he's also a regular who went to Papa Don's. That night he wore an Ohio State jacket. And also, several of these patrons have their favorite spots where they like to hang out with. Dave Eisel liked to be on that north end, at the very top of that letter L, like to stand there, having some drinks and talking with some friends. He's also referred to sometimes as Country Dave because he's got a bit of a twang that you'll hear when he testifies.
Can you just pull that microphone up a little closer to your
Yep.
Yeah, that's better.
Thomas Russell is another individual that you'll become familiar with. He's a fellow Akron police officer. He was at the bar that evening, and sitting next to him was Dave Shields, another Akron Police Department officer. Also at that bar that night were regulars Anne Marie Cusio. Anne Marie used to work at Papa Don's, and she, along with her boyfriend Ravon, went to the bar often. They also socially hung out with Justin and Tiffany, and they were planning to go to the Cleveland Browns game the next day. Now, while Ravon, you'll learn, liked to pretty much station himself at one of those tables right by the front door and pretty much not leave the whole time, Anne-Marie likes to kind of be a social butterfly, walk around the bar, talk to the people she knows. And that's what she did that evening. As I told you, the defendant, he was there. While on prior occasions he kind of kept to himself and didn't really engage in a lot of conversation, he was acting different that night. You will hear evidence that that night he was very extroverted, very involved in engaging in conversations, hitting on girls, very talkative to people that he didn't know. And it was while he was doing that, and while Anne-Marie was kind of making her rounds, that the first bit of problem started that evening. While the defendant was in his bar seat, and Anne-Marie was standing at the bottom of that L on the south side, the defendant tried to engage her in a conversation. And he became more and more aggressive, forcing her to engage in a conversation, hitting on her, flirting on her. And the way he did it was making her feel uncomfortable. And at one point, he went so far as to order her to come over to where he was sitting. And she tried to get him to leave her alone, told her, no, I'm not coming over there. I have a boyfriend, and my boyfriend is even here at the bar. Well, that didn't stop the defendant. In fact, his reply to that was, I don't care, I have a 40. Anne-Marie continued to feel uncomfortable, and so uncomfortable that she asked the bartender if she could go behind the bar to go back to where Ravon was sitting and not go by all the bar stools where she would have to pass the defendant. She had worked there before, so the bartender was fine, and sure enough, Anne-Marie goes behind the bar to get back to the table where Ravon is sitting. At that point, when she gets over there, Ravon's there, their friends are there, and Tiffany Miller, one of the bar owners, happens to be there as well. And when Anne-Marie gets over there, she immediately tells him what just happened, how aggressive this guy was talking to her, and she points over there. Well, the defendant was paying attention. He was watching what was going on and watching the conversation going over there, and he felt the need then to walk over there himself. So he got out of his bar stool, he walked over to the table there, and almost immediately he starts getting into an argument with Tiffany, being defiant about, I didn't do anything wrong, I don't know those people, arguing more with Tiffany and throwing some words over at Anne-Marie, throwing some words at Ravon. Now, Tiffany's not a stranger to problems. If you own a bar, you're going to have people who are angry, who are upset, who argue, and all types of minor problems that can occur. So this was nothing new. This was not any reason why she's going to kick this guy out. But her goal is to de-escalate the problem, to calm the situation. And so she convinced the defendant to go to the back of the bar, to the south end, and so that they could talk and not be right in the center of the bar and make such a scene. And in fact, they did that. Went back to one of those pub tables in the back. Tiffany had a seat. She invited the defendant to sit down. He didn't want to. And they started talking. But the demeanor, the subject, everything kept being the same over and over and over. Defiance, unreasonableness. The defendant was upset, felt he had been the victim in all of this. And it went on and on. It went on so long that people in the bar started getting concerned. Justin Winebrenner became concerned. He walked over there to check on them. Tiffany said, we're fine, we're okay. One of the bar backs, Jeffrey Bates, was a military background. He went over there to check on her. Once again, Tiffany, I can handle this. But even after they left, the conversation went on, and finally Tiffany had had enough. There wasn't going to be any calming down of this situation, and so she made the decision, pack up his food, and he's going to go. And that's what she told the bartender. Pack up his food, and this gentleman's leaving. And undoubtedly, the defendant was upset about that. But he stayed at the bar for a little longer. He paid his bill for the drinks, the food that he had purchased, and then he got up, and he started walking out of the bar. But before he left the bar, sitting in the middle of that bar area was Justin Winebrenner. And he leaned over, and he gave Justin Winebrenner an earful. And one of the words that you will hear was said during that earful is, I should slap that bitch. I should slap that bitch. Justin apparently seemingly ignores him, just has a couple drinks, and then the defendant walks out of the bar. Not escorted out of the bar, not forced out of the bar, he leaves. And for the moment, people who were in the bar who were aware of that problem think, hey, it's over. That little scene is over with. Our argument, it was a little argument, an unreasonable patron, but nothing more. But that was not to be, because for the defendant, he wasn't going to let it go. And sure enough, about 4 or 5 minutes later, he returned. And he wanted his revenge. For a person that you will hear about in that bar, flaunting a wad of cash, flaunting that he had real diamond earrings, the way he was treated in that bar was unacceptable. He was angry at how Anne-Marie had rejected him, angry at Tiffany, angry at anybody that represented that bar as to how he was treated and forced to leave. And so when he pulled up in his car, a little bit before that 1:53 mark, he put a gun into his right waistband and he walked into that bar. And when he walked in, almost immediately standing there is Big Dave, and Tiffany and Anne-Marie. And the argument started right away. Right away, Tiffany's telling me, we kicked you out, you've got to go. Words are being exchanged between the defendant and Big Dave. And while this argument is going on, the defendant's doing something. He looks down, touches his gun, makes sure it's ready to go. Because the gun is out, you can see it. Continues to argue. A second time, looks down and feels that gun, makes sure it's ready to go. Continues arguing, and then finally a third time, looks down, touches that gun, it's ready to go. Now at some point, nobody else really had seen the gun. It was right there in that circle. Tiffany notices the gun in the waistband. The defendant had made some remarks about, I'm not alone this time, and now it registered with her. Because she saw that gun, and she immediately then went over to Justin. Justin was there as a patron, but a police officer rule is you're never really off duty, especially when danger occurs. And so she went and told Justin. It just so happened that the defendant had made his way farther into the bar and was relatively close to where Justin was sitting. And at that point, Justin turned around, looked over at Kenan Ivery, then got up and approached him in a calm manner. But the defendant was resistant to his approach, and the struggle was on. Kenan Ivery with a gun, Justin Winebrenner not armed, he did not have a gun that night. And Dave Eisel also came over, not armed, no gun that night. And once again, they had the goal of chasing him out of that bar, an angry man with a gun who has now drawn that gun and is ready to use it. And looking at the diagram, confrontation occurs kind of one bit over the bar, but the movement then goes towards that front door that you all walked in and walked out. And the movement is getting Kenan Ivery backing out towards that door. But just steps before the defendant backed out that door, there is a separation. And at that time, just steps before that front door, the first shot is fired. And I believe that first shot actually hit 3 individuals. It hit Dave Wakati, went through his left arm, actually went through his abdomen and out the back. Standing a couple feet behind him was Jennifer Imhoff. It went through her left arm as well. And then sitting behind her, sitting at the bar, was Thomas Russell. And that bullet went through his sweatshirt and grazed the side of his body. As they continued to chase him out the bar, he continued to fire the gun. One bullet, Dave Eisel, was not struck by a bullet. But you will see evidence of his shirt, his Ohio State jacket, that he actually has a bullet traveling from left to right that goes in the jacket and out the jacket an inch or two later. And that bullet probably also hit an individual by the name of Michael Capes. Michael Capes had literally came into the bar about 30 seconds before the shooting occurred. Went and stood over there at the the top of the L, and a bullet ended up going through his foot. And Justin Winebrenner was hit by the other 2 bullets. One bullet went into the right side of his chest, went through his right lung, and went out the back. Another bullet went through the lower part of his torso, through the abdomen, came in contact with his vertebrae, and went out the back. He would collapse there in the parking lot. But it's important to note that before he collapsed, he was able to knock that gun away from Kenan Ivery. That gun was knocked away and it flew to the ground in that parking lot. And that bar back that I mentioned to you before, Jeffrey Bates, he happened to be outside at the time. He happened to witness the events that occurred outside that door. And when he saw that gun, his first thought was, I got to get this gun away from this guy so he doesn't have access to it. And Jeffrey Bates picked up that gun, went down the side of the bar outside, and threw it into a dumpster. The defendant took off, ran towards the street, ran towards the exit ramp that we stopped at. Meanwhile, inside in that bar, chaos ensued. Dave O'Cady, who had been shot through his arm and through his body, had tried to make his way towards the bathroom and he collapsed. People were treating him with towels. And outside, Justin Winebrenner laid on the ground fighting for his life. Police was called, EMS was called. Justin was taken to Akron City Hospital, but just about a half hour later at 2:28 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Now, how will you know that the events that I've just talked to you about occurred back on the 15th and 16th of November? Well, first of all, you will hear from multiple witnesses in this case, multiple individuals that were either struck by a bullet, who witnessed what went on. You will not hear from everybody who was in that bar that night. Well, pretty much everybody was spoken to by the police department. But you will hear from people who saw, who heard, who observed seminal moments in this case. Moments that deal with the defendant as to why he became angry that night. And those individuals who saw some of the specifics when the shooting actually occurred. But as I kind of went over in voir dire, some of their memories aren't the best. This was a long evening, an hour and a half of conversations going on in the bar, drinking, a lot of drama, loud music. And so you will hear some individuals will give you great memory of what happened that night, while others will remember very little. For example, Jennifer Imhoff. Her alcohol level was extremely high. And she will testify, but she has very little memory of what occurred that evening. You will hear that Jennifer Imhoff went to the hospital, was treated and released. Michael Capes, the guy who got shot in the foot, was treated and released. Dave O'Cady was in the hospital for about a week. His lung collapsed. He had portions of his colon were removed, 5 inches of his colon were removed. And you will hear from them. You will also hear about the investigation, and police immediately arrived on the scene. They arrived there while Justin was still lying on the ground, and even though their fellow brother was down there fighting for their life, they were professionals. And priority number one, since they had EMS workers working on Justin, was to find the shooter. And so they learned that there was a video security footage. But there's cameras throughout the bar, as you saw, and so much of this was captured on video. And they got a description of the shooter from individuals, and it was confirmed when they looked on the video. And they also were able to see from the parking lot camera which direction he went. And so word was spread out where to look for him. And ultimately, in that little field where you saw Sergeant Lickey standing, the defendant was lying down hiding. And at one point, there's some officers in the area, and they see a head stick up, and then go back down. They yelled to the defendant. Now, understand at this point, this is the shooter, and this shooter has a gun in their mouth. And when the defendant did not listen to their commands, they let the canine dog loose. And the canine dog got a hold of the defendant, held him in his leg. He was still laying down with his hands underneath him, and they're telling him, show your hands. You got to see your hands. Where's the gun? One officer is already down, And when he wouldn't comply with those orders, they forced him to show his hands. By hitting him in the face, those orders, they forced him to show his hands. By hitting him in the face and about the body. He was under arrest at that point. You will also hear that back at the bar, witnesses were being interviewed. Pretty much everybody who was at that bar who hadn't left unexpectedly. In fact, police would spend the next several weeks not only interviewing witnesses once, but interviewing them multiple times. The scene was processed. There's a special segment of the Akron Police Department known as the Crime Scene Unit. And they examined the scene. And for our purposes, some of the important parts of their investigation is that they found 4 shell cases, confirming that 4 bullets were fired. They found 3 bullets on the scene, eventually. All of them weren't found the first day, but they found 3 bullets. 1 bullet was found on the floor near where Katie collapsed. You also have heard that there's video, that there's 2 main videos inside that bar that will be the focus of much of what you'll see and hear, known as cameras number 3 and cameras number 4. Now, camera number 4 is the camera that was above the exit sign by the patio, looking into the bar, and camera number 3 was one of the cameras behind the bar facing the front entrance. The other camera there is focused on the cash register. So that other camera doesn't have the specifics of what occurred that evening. But those 2 cameras capture what happened. And at this time, I'm going to play you camera number 4 and the 1 minute in which this shooting occurred. That won't be the only time you see that video. We'll hear witnesses who were there testify about some of the specifics of that video. We'll have the opportunity to slow down that video, slide by slide. But what's important to note that is the most important evidence here. But it doesn't stand alone, that video. This is not a matter of just showing you the video and then letting you go back into that jury room to deliberate. The video does not stand alone. Instead, you're going to need to hear the testimony of the witnesses and see evidence of the other parts of the video of what led up to that moment, to understand the context of what occurred there, as well as the context of what occurred moment by moment when the defendant re-entered that bar. As I said earlier, several of the shots occur when the defendant has gone outside. And you were shown that there is one video camera on the outside. It's important for you all to know That camera did not capture what happened on the outside. The placement of that camera is not where the shooting occurred outside or where Justin Winebrenner fell down. You will only be able to see cars from that video. But one of the witnesses in this case, Jeffrey Bates, the barback, happened to be outside when that occurred. He had taken a drunk patron where they were going to get a taxi. It just so happened that he took him outside, and so he was there, and he will describe to you what he saw when the three of them end up outside. The charges in this case, you have a slew of charges, and you'll be instructed on them. The charges in this case, you have a slew of charges, and you'll be instructed on them in much more detail at the end of the case, but I kind of want to give you a preview of what type of charges the defendant is confronted with and what type of charges the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Counts 1 through 4 in this case all deal with Justin Winebrenner as the victim. The defendant is charged with aggravated murder, another count of murder, which we often call felony murder, and felonious assault. Aggravated murder has the additional element that the defendant acted with prior calculation and design. And that will be defined for you at the end of these proceedings. Murder involves the purposeful killing of another. There are also specifications to that aggravated murder. The specification that we talked to you at length is the death penalty specification. That is part of the course of conduct of that aggravated murder. The defendant killed or attempted to kill 2 or more people. And you know now that he didn't kill 2 people. And he didn't kill. But the allegation is that he attempted to kill 2 or more people. There's also a specific firearm specification for firing a gun at a law enforcement officer. And the specification 3 is a regular firearm specification that a gun was used in the commission of the offense. Counts 5 through 9 are all attempted murder charges. And for the individuals I told you were either shot or Dave Eisel's case, bullet went right through his front part of his jacket. Those are counts 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. We talked a little bit in voir dire about the concept of transfer intent, which will be explained to you. Some of these individuals, there'll be the state's allegation that the defendant aimed and attempted to shoot at, while others just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Felonious assault for those same victims, counts 10 through 14. And then the defendant is charged with 3 specific weapons violations. One being having weapons while under disability. And because he has a prior felony drug abuse offense, he is not allowed by law to even possess a gun because of his prior weapon. Carrying a concealed weapon, and count 17, illegal possession of firearms or liquor on the premise. Once again, the law is, besides you're in the bar, you cannot bring a gun into a bar that's a commercial place, and then tampering with that. You will also be told at the end all the elements that are involved in all those specific crimes. One of those elements is not motive. The state does not have to prove motive, but I think I've referred to you that there will be evidence presented as to why the defendant was angry that night. But nothing you will hear is going to make sense as to the defendant's conduct that night. You're not going to hear any one bit of evidence that's going to tell you, oh, that's why he did what he did. It was a senseless shooting. It was a senseless killing. And at the close of all the evidence, we will return to you and ask that you, members of the jury, find the defendant guilty of each and every count in this case. Thank you.